Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us for our speaker series event, Integrating Experiences Working in Academia and Industry with Dr. Alaina Phillips. Um, we are presenting from the ACM-W Professional Chapter OCWIC, which is the Ohio Celebration for Women in Computing. Excuse me. And this is a statewide community of women and men technology professionals from industry and academia who are dedicated to engaging and empowering Ohio women in computing by, excuse me, building community, celebrating success, and illuminating possibility. So we are here for all of you. And this is our second session of the semester for everybody here today. Thank you so much for joining. I'm going to hand it over to Alaina.
You're okay. Thank you for having me. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So before I get started, I just wanted to kind of preface and sort of set the tone for today's kind of conversation, which is what I'd like it to be. So as mentioned, I sort of bridge worlds between academia and industry. And I'll have some broad strokes or some generalizations that may not necessarily resonate with each one of your experiences. They're kind of written from a personal perspective of just how I've navigated and endured a journey, kind of handling both. But in saying that, I've had situations where, you know, the arrow is going one way, where we're talking about transitioning from academia into industry. But then I've also had the arrow go the other way, where I've had industry professionals ask me how to become an academic. For today's talk, I have sort of structured my slides in a way from academia toward industry, but we can also open up the conversation and the platform for how to bridge industry into academia and go the other way too. So I'm open to what kind of ever emerges out of this conversation and answering your questions. And again, just for purposes of presentation, if you're not on mute, if you can be on mute while I'm going through, and then come off as we have questions and conversation, that's wonderful. Okay, is everyone ready to get started? Okay, good. All right. So just a little bit about me. I have my doctorate in cognitive psych. I achieved that from the University of Akron. And then after I graduated, I went into a postdoc in clinical neuropsychology, where I actually practiced and saw patients and worked under supervision and licensure up in Northeastern Ohio. And after I did that for about 18 months, I realized that I did not want to continue on to that journey. And I thought, gee, what can I do with this cognitive psych degree that I have? My dissertation had been in visual attention and primarily in usability on transit materials. And that work has since been published in the Encyclopedia of Human Factors under my advisor's name, Stearns and Stearns. But basically, that opened the door for me to explore being a user researcher and an applied behavioral scientist. So I was very fortunate in that I had sort of a segue into the tech space in that world. And that's where I decided I would attend Kent State in their UX design program. And I was fortunate enough to meet a mentor who was one of my faculty members while I was there. And she kind of took me under her wing and opened up doors for me. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But that afforded me great opportunities, and some that I'll speak to today. And in addition to that, I never left the teaching space. So currently, I am an adjunct graduate professor at NYU in the Mental Health and Counseling Steinhardt Department. And so my students often come out and are counselors, either in the educational or mental health spaces. And so I still work hard to stay abreast of clinical neuropsych and mental health topics so that I can best inform my students. I still attend conferences every year within that space and still have my hand very much in that area. Also, I teach at the undergrad level for Walsh University, which is a private college in Ohio. And I teach a variety of courses there, everything from statistics to industrial organizational psychology, and everything kind of in between that encompasses the human and lifespan journey. Currently, my day job, my 9 to 5, so to speak, I am a senior UX researcher at PPG. And what I do there is help coordinate, plan, execute research projects across a variety of our spaces. So I work on things every day, from the actual website to color journeys to lead generation to AI and kind of everything in between, whatever they throw at me. I want to kind of talk about some expectations or some broad strokes. And again, these are generalizations. Some of them are stereotypes, which we hate to, dabble in, but it's things that you hear. And I've kind of categorized them, and it's important for a reason. Not everyone will critically think throughout your career journey and your process. Not everyone will escape that sort of boxing or segmenting or putting you into one category or another. And as unfortunate as that sounds, it's what happens in reality. And it's what happened to me. People wanted to lump me in as an academic, and they didn't want to give me opportunity in the space. And so when I really started breaking down barriers and understanding what both the sort of the mental model people have of the ways of working in each. It really went to, thinking about academia in sort of this positive light, typically, where the research is going to be slow. It's arduous. It's full of precision. You have to have this sort of inner resiliency because you have to keep coming back, understanding, your sources, the lit review, the feedback. It sort of builds your character over time because there's, so much thrown at you. Oftentimes your stuff is peer reviewed and you go through that arduous process of if you're publication, engaging in publication and things like that. And then you have many resources available. You have libraries, you have faculty, you have people at your disposal to answer questions. You have the internet, you have now ChatGPT, for better or for worse. But you have all these resources. And so there's endless possibilities and really sort of ideals, if you will, or happy paths afforded to you. But oftentimes in industry, it's a little bit different, and there's a little bit of a contrast. So we're fast-paced typically. Right. We respond to product. We do research activities that are just good enough. They don't have the academic rigor sometimes that we think that maybe they should. We work in agile environments or waterfall environments. And again, really iterative, fast-paced, need it yesterday kind of mentality. And oftentimes we're afforded within that space few resources, or our resources are blocked or siloed off. And so we have to work with what we've got. We have to work with constraints. And there are seemingly endless constraints, and sometimes unhappy paths. So when you're transitioning or you're sort of floating in both spaces or trying to get from one space to the other, it really requires sort of this mental shifting or this mental back and forth as to what one area is going to respond to over another. And again, this might not resonate with everyone, and these are really broad strokes, But there are things that I noticed as I was going through interviews, talking to professionals, folks in one camp versus another. And it really is sort of this us versus them mentality. And it works both ways. Academia don't understand why we do all this research and it's not implemented in real life. And in real life, they don't understand how to implement all this research. I was just at a neuropsych conference and they were talking about prosthetics, and all the research supports that with prosthetics that people don't want things that look like their own body. They prefer robotic or technological looking apparatuses. One of the questions was, how do we get this into production? And someone from industry, that space was there and said, it doesn't support the bottom line. You're not going to. And it was kind of a shock to everybody, every academic in the room. But again, coming from the industry background myself, I understood exactly what that man was saying from his business, because it would be very hard. It would be a very heavy lift for a product. So there's things like that. And as far as, again, barriers to entry. So as I mentioned, I've kind of set this up to, again, transitioning academics into industry. But again, there is that bidirectional arrow. It goes both ways. But just speaking from going from academia into industry, some of the things that I experienced were folks highlighting for me my lack of industry experience. They don't understand often what academics bring to the table as far as skill sets. And then oftentimes, because you've been in the academic space for so long, you maybe aren't up to speed with all the relevant tools you would need for a day-to-day job. For example, if you're not proficient in Figma in UX design, don't bother. So it's things like that really are hurdles. And then also too, there's this judgment again that comes along with it. Like, oh, you're a PhD. We're not looking for somebody with that much rigor, or you're a know-it-all. I don't want you telling me how to do my job. And I've even been called a know-it-all. And it actually hurts because there's a bias there. And I'm not trying to come across as one. I feel actually like I'm very humble in the way that I present my data and my research. But sometimes it can be perceived as threatening when certain data points, or when you're going against someone else's agenda. And then also, coming from academia myself, like one of the biggest issues I had was I didn't even know where to start as far as like looking. I never had a class that showed me how to go out and get a corporate job. I just didn't. My work was focused around, understanding my patients and understanding like how to assess folks clinically and understanding how to test people in a clinical space and basically be a psychometrist. And so I never really had anybody show me like, oh, this is what you do. This is how your resume should look. This is how your cover letter should look. This is what, your portfolio should look like. This is the skills. These are the skills you should highlight. I had to learn all of that kind of, transitioning and what might be important or what might be relevant. So at this point, I'd kind of like to stop talking and ask if any of this resonates, or kind of open it up, see what folks think, see if anybody's kind of experienced this yourself. Is there anyone?
Alaina, I'll just jump in real quick. When you showed the slide about, the academic side of how to get things done, a lot of research, a slow pace. I experienced that in my professional life, in that one of the companies that I worked for hired and appreciated a lot of PhD. So the pace there was almost glacial at times, trying to release things, and I found that frustrating. And then when I moved more into industry side roles, I noticed, yeah, the pace picks up and you get into what's the, minimum viable product, and that's good enough. So very interesting because, I was always frustrated by that, or felt overly pressured with the just get things done right now. That's a big switch.
Yeah.
So I appreciate you, explaining that a little bit more, that there's some background to it.
Yeah, and it's one of those things too. To your point, there are organizations that really do value PhDs. I can think of a few, like even ecosystems, like banking, for example. The banking ecosystem, they almost always hire for UX researchers PhDs because they want someone who's good at quantitative. You know, so there are relevant, areas there. Big tech like Microsoft, they'll hire PhDs. Meta hires a lot of PhDs. Especially they'll hire a lot of PhDs in cognitive because they want to get inside people's like decision making capabilities. But then on the other hand, startups, everyday, folks who are just trying to get things into production, they want someone who's fast, who's agile, who just can deliver quick insights to move products along. And so really, you kind of have to know the environment that will help you make that transition. So there's that. Okay, I was just looking in the chat to see if there was anything else. But yeah, thank you. So that kind of gets into what did I do? And so the next few slides, I have some like quick tips or some things I'd like to cover for each of you. But again, you take them as they resonate. I'm not here to prescribe anything. I'm here to really tell you what worked for me and what helped me sort of break through those barriers. So the first one is really understanding your unique needs as a person. So I went through a ton of like self-exploration, and that might be comical to some folks, like introspection, because I'm a psychologist, so of course I would. But it really does start with yourself. What do you want? What makes you happy? What is your goal? Where is your legacy? And for some of you, it's just, I want a 6-figure job. Well, money's good, but also money's not that great if it drives you into such a mental state that you can't get through your day to day, because that money is not going to help you mentally. You really have to find out who you are and what you want and what type of environment you want to be in. And so it seems counterintuitive because some of you might be in desperate situations where you're like, I need money yesterday again, because like I'm broke, But again, if you do take the time to kind of do this, it sets you up for success later. It's kind of like anything. If you do the planning in the front, the back end's easy, rather than trying to tackle it from the other way. So things that I did, there's a book called Designing Your Life. And it really takes sort of like a UX perspective of, sort of carving out what you want to do. I joined a reading group with my friend. We read that book together. We did those activities together. We workshopped it. We journaled what our wants and our needs were, what our capacities were, what we were willing to do as far as our day to day, what we were willing to tolerate. And and really it kind of all feeds into how you're willing to work. Do you want a fast-paced environment, or do you want something that's more kind of your speed? And if you do want that fast-paced environment, are you willing to do the work mentally or otherwise that will support that? So really kind of understanding that, yeah, you have a starting place and you have a goal, but what's the journey in between and how are you going to get there? And what are the small steps to get there? Because that is all also work. And what do you have the bandwidth for? So,
Hi.
and yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I
Yeah.
just wanted to jump in. There's a question that came in. Can you talk about a UX project you did and what PhD skills you used?
Yeah. Let me go ahead and go through this one, and then we'll talk about that. And I'll come back to that in the deliverables section because I do want to hit that. So the second tenet I have here is just to participate in everything and anything. Even if you might not think it's relevant to you at the time, it might come back to be time. So again, who are you engaging with? How is your outreach? Are you know, again, networking? Who are you meeting? What are you doing to familiarize yourself with the tools in that space, whether it's industry or academia? Like in industry, are you proficient in SPSS? You know, sorry, in academia. Do you know what an ANOVA is? You know, things like that. Or if you're in design or in tech, you know, do you know how to program? Are you working with Storybook? Are you doing the things, or Figma? Are you doing the things that are, and if you don't have access to those like software platforms, are you engaging in free ones that are comparable? So you might not have SPSS, but you do have Excel, you know, or Google Sheets. You know, you can do, you know, data collection, learn how to do pivot tables, that sort of thing. Basically, are you matching your skills and your developing skills with what's going to be required in that interview when they ask you, do you know how to do this? And then finally, do you have a mentor? And I realize I left an O off of there, but do you have a mentor? As I mentioned, I don't think near the doors would have been opened for me as quickly as they had I not had a mentor out of that Kent State program, which I am forever grateful for. And every time I sit down and I think of my gratitude towards my life and the way that I live and the opportunities I'm afforded, that mentor always pops in my mind, and I reach out to that mentor and just say, hey, I'm grateful for you, you know? And then creating deliverables. So if you're going to go down a path and you're going to plot out that journey of how to get that job or how to get, you know, to that place, whatever that place is for you, are you creating the deliverables that coincide with what's needed there? So if you're programming, you know, being able to program that website, capture that process, capture the, you know, the transition points and the endpoints of that, of your process, document them out, document your logic out, so that when, again, you're in an interview and your portfolio, you know, demonstrating and things like that, you're matching with what they want or what they need. If you're in academia, are you doing the literature reviews? Are your premises well thought out and supported? And again, what does your documentation look like? Are you engaging in the activities that you eventually want to do? And then, you know, again, going back to, which, you know, sometimes it's difficult to find time for, especially if you're in desperate situations, but volunteering. Any volunteering, any case studies you can perform, even if they're small ones, are still work. They're still activity that's moving the needle forward. And then also perform your own skill assessment. You know, there are tons of like web assessments online of like strengths and weaknesses. Sometimes what I would do is I'd go to Indeed or go to a job listing and I'd check through where my strengths and weaknesses were. And then I'd highlight those and then I'd work on them as I was trying to go through. So, kind of back to the question that was asked about, you know, projects that I've worked on. One of the earliest things that I did coming out of that academic space and working with my mentor is I worked for a secondary ticketing platform. And it was by far the project that opened the most doors, because what it involved, it was, again, a secondary ticketing platform. They had lost $10 million on, a bid that they had made. And they basically thought that, and when I say they, I mean the main stakeholders, thought that they lost the money because of the way that the tickets were distributed, either electronic or paper. And it didn't make sense to me. And I don't think it would make sense to any of you, because if you ever have been to a concert or an event or something really, really cool, what's the one thing you want? You want a memento. You want that paper ticket. So it doesn't make sense that you'd lose money on if it was paper, because I mean, that's the emotional tie. So for me, I went in with my mentor and we had stakeholder interviews, and I thought, this is a decision aspect. Like, folks are doing something here. Let's look at the decisions that they're making. Let's do a cognitive analysis, and let's look at the choices that they're afforded. And it turns out that for that batch of tickets, there was no even choice to be made. It automatically distributed the ticket as it was in the batch. So they weren't even making decisions. It was forced. And so it just turns out that it was a bad event because it was on a Wednesday night. And when we asked people, why didn't you want to do this event? They were like, well, I couldn't get drunk during the concert because it was on a Wednesday night. They gave real human answers. Surprise. But yeah, or, I can't get a babysitter or some artifact like that. And so it really kind of opened up the doors. And what I was able to do from that, and what I was able to deliver, is sort of a decision tree, and provide that work for them. And then that opened the door to talk to their internal team and allowed me to create a journey map. And what was actually interesting about that journey map is it's all time-based, because ticketing is very much a time-based system. And if you look at like concerts from, their first point of launch to look at, ticket sales the day before, they fluctuate and vary. And a lot of the variables work like the stock market would work. So things like weather play a part or play a role in ticket prices. Days before event play a role. Whether someone adjusts the interest on them, all sorts of variables. And even the artists themselves, certain artists only go under certain contracts, so that attenuates the ticket price. So being able to kind of lay that out, work on that, have both of those things in my portfolio, and then showcase this is the work I can do during an interview, was extremely powerful. But again, that was an internship position. So here I am. I've been a doctor. I've been treating patients. I'm, I don't want to date myself, but I'm in my late 30s at this point, and I'm doing an internship. Okay. So again, you're not above having to do the work just because you have a PhD. Sometimes you have to go backward to go forward. And, sometimes you have to swallow your pride and your ego and whatever you think comes along with that PhD, and just be open to new experiences and open to, I'm going to have to pivot, So as far as things that I did, I interviewed like crazy. And every failure, which I had many, I just took them as data collection points to get better and to refine, which I'm sure most of you have heard. Some of this isn't new information to you, but maybe if I was always one of those people that if someone said it the right way to me, it made more sense. So hopefully I can do that for you. But also taking documentation and understanding what your role would be, or asking that question in an interview. What's my day-to-day going to look like? What do you expect from me in the day-to-day? What activities do you do daily? And who will I work with? Understanding that aspect alone can be really powerful, engaging whether or not you want to work with them. Because just because you want a job doesn't necessarily mean you want to work in that environment. And it doesn't mean that you'll be happy in that environment. So if you understand what it is you'll be doing and how it will pair with you and what it is really around goodness of fit will help you kind of navigate to the path that you need to be on. And then again, if it listed in a job description, even if it's a weakness, you need to be able to showcase that you can at minimum do it. And this is another thing, like you need to be able to fit the job. If it's great if you get a job and you get there your first day and you told them you knew how to do something, and then you realize that, oh no, you don't, or not to the level that they wanted. And then you're like, oh no, what do I do? And that's when imposter syndrome might start to kick in. And when you realize you're out of your depth. And nobody wants that, so make sure that you at least have a baseline to work from and to grow from. You're not going to know everything. Nobody expects you to, but at least have the bare minimum to where you can go into an interview and say, you know what, that's not a strength of mine, but I would really like to grow in that area. And that's exactly why I'm interested in this position, because it affords me the chance to do so. And just being, transparent about it. They'll appreciate that more than the other scenario. And then always integrate your learnings. Always keep a pulse on yourself and what makes you happy. What, again, conditions you're willing to work with. Kind of going back to this other slide, in terms of journaling your lists or your wants, one of the things that I did, and one of the things that I mentor students and folks to do, is to create an Excel document and to create your top parameters of where you're willing to be and what you're willing to do and what's your minimums, basically. So I know that I need this salary to live, period. I know that I want this working environment, period. I know that I want this. And then maybe for your first transitioning role, maybe you only hit 3 of the 5 until your next role. And then maybe you hit 4 of the 5, and you just keep growing and keep iterating on your own process. So much of tech, so much of design, so much of research is iteration. Your development is no different. So constantly keep iterating. And spoiler alert, as I mentioned, you can do both. So I, again, 9 to 5, I work in industry. And then from 5 to 6, I go pick up my kids because I'm a single mom. And then from 7 to 9, I'm online being an instructor in a variety of courses. So, and why do I keep my hand in it? Because I love it, because it's my legacy. I want to know that, like, I made an impact or I made a difference for folks. And, just because you're my student once doesn't mean that, you can't reach out to me and that you won't be my student for life. That's just the way that I am. And so I love working in both worlds. It is challenging, but really the way that I'm able to go back and forth is because I'm adapted to my audience. I know that when I, stop that clock at 5 p.m. and I go into teaching, I'm not going to be able to talk to them about, MVPs. I'm going to have to talk to them about anxiety and depression and mental health concerns. And I have to be able to switch like that. So if you're not cognitively flexible, that might be challenging for you. And you might want to be in one space, and that's okay. You don't have to be in both, but you can be. And so I guess the point is, don't let people box you in if you know that you're capable of more. People will try to box you in. We all try to categorize our world. We start out as infants categorizing our world. It's one of the first things we learn to do. It's how mental hierarchies and thinking are established, how we form concepts. But it doesn't mean that we can't to use a Piagetian term, accommodate and bring in new information and constantly evolve. And again, many UXers, in fact, a lot of them I know, are professionals. They teach, they engage in public speaking. They do all kinds of speaking events. I love doing work like this because I love talking to all of you and just getting, perspective. But again, it goes back to what fulfills you, and what fulfills me is kind of like being that starting point or being that legacy for people. And so it fulfills me. And working with all different kinds of folks and helping people get to where they need to be, like that's my passion. When I fill out my Excel sheet of what drives me, I don't want to be at a corporation that doesn't celebrate DEI, because DEI is important to me. So I'm not going to choose a corporation that doesn't, value that. Continuous learning is another one. I don't want to be at a corporation that doesn't support the growth of its workers. So I am constantly, even with all my education and all my experience in different realms, I'm constantly trying to learn everything I can. I'm constantly reading. I've got my nose in a book. So it's just, one of those things where what drives you and what fulfills you is what's going to work for you in whichever area you transfer to, or if you do both.
I love that. I just need to jump in. One, late 30s, saying that you're dating yourself. Don't insult the rest of us who are all far past that. But also, beyond that, I love that every piece of advice you gave really is for both. I coach people going into new jobs in the exact same way of making sure you prioritize, what your priorities are. You're really honest with yourself about what you're looking for. And it's just interesting that yes, you can do both, but really this advice also carries for if you're doing either or both. It's the same baseline. And I love that is so relatable, because you'll find that I'm not in academia, but obviously I'm learning now that you can see all of that in the academic world. And I know I see it in industry every single day.
Well, and something I learned along my way, like I mentioned, I've been bullied even, and that's been really difficult emotionally for me. And I've worked through it. But oftentimes I'm bullied because I don't fit well into one category or another. Mm-hmm. But that is a reflection of that person. That is not a reflection of me. Absolutely. And so if you are going to straddle these worlds or be in both worlds or blend in any way, note that if you encounter resistance, A, those aren't your people. And B, it's not a reflection of you. It's a reflection of them and their rigid thinking. I mentioned that I'm at PPG. It has taken me a while to find people that understand and accept me and understand the way that I think. And I love being at PPG because they're my people. My team gets me. They understand everything that I'm saying. And I feel psychologically safe there, which is another one of my key components. You need to feel psychologically safe where you are to express your ideas, to again, innovate. The whole reason we're in tech is because we want to be innovators. So, and, in academia, you build theories and models and, you have passion towards everything that we encounter in the human experience. And so when you come up against those, resistance or those barriers, again, know that it's not you. Just work around, try to find your people, try to find what resonates. Yep. And it might take you a while.
Actually, I have 2 questions in the chat, and if I bring the chat over, that makes life easier here. The first, and this was a few minutes ago, so apologies for the delay. Do you have any recommendations on how we can find mentors? I don't believe that finding such a person nowadays is as easy as it may seem.
It's not easy. There are mentoring networks. I've had a few people actually on LinkedIn reach out to me, although I can't remember the organization name at this time. But there are some groups that try to collect mentors for people and set them up. I've never operated in such a way. Again, my mentor was my teacher. And one of the other, I wouldn't categorize as a mentor, but one of the people that I would say helped me move forward professionally is actually on this call, Melanie. I have appreciated Melanie's support. Sometimes, even if you can't find a mentor, finding an ally in the space is equally as has equal magnitude. And I've mentioned to Melanie a number of times what a powerful ally she is to me. So I hope she understands her importance in my life. But sometimes it's not easy. Sometimes you'll find it in a teacher. Sometimes you'll find it in a colleague who has advanced and you have not. And so I'm not sure I have a great answer for that, but I think too, when you do find someone to talk to, whether it be a mentor or an ally or somewhere in between, being able to know what it is you want to ask, because sometimes, again, you don't know where to get started. So that can be challenging to well, what do I need to know? Because you have that element of hypocognition where you're not sure what you don't know what you don't know. But being able to network, go to every event, again, it ties back into that too. You can't meet anybody sitting at home not attending things, So if you're a part of UXPA, if you're a part of, there was a point in time prior to PPG, and I'll just be anecdotal about this, where I wanted to potentially entertain being a games user researcher. So what I did was I didn't know anybody in the gaming space. So I had to start from scratch. And what I ended up doing there is I enrolled in a class through Interaction Foundation. And I took the course and used it as a networking time and participated and interacted with the group. Some of it's uncomfortable because, believe it or not, I'm an introvert. So after I log off today, I probably won't talk to anybody the rest of the weekend. But to that end, I ended up connecting with a person there who connected me to another event, who connected me to women in gaming. I went to that event, networked with a bunch of people, ended up meeting a lovely group of women in the gaming space who advocate for women in gaming. And that opened up doors for me. And now I have people on my LinkedIn from HBO, from Sony, from Warner Brothers, you name it, it's there. And those people talk to me and I have that pocket of people. So it really can be like that. If you don't have access to a mentor or can't find, those are the kinds of activities that can get you to it, if that helps.
Yeah. I would even say activities like this, because you're meeting another group of people. And please do, I normally say this at the end, but please do connect with each other and with all of us on LinkedIn.
Yep.
And
I'm available
and
and I can give you my LinkedIn too. Yeah.
Absolutely. Make those connections. And I'm going to send out, Alaina, with your permission, on the follow-up email with a link to her on LinkedIn, a link to me. Anybody else who wants to be included on that, feel free to ping me. Let me know if you want to actively reach out, but also reach out to each other. A lot of you I know go to the same school. So make connections in different classes, in different committees, and different teams and groups. And when you're on an event like this, people who do go to other schools, and make those connections as you can. All of these groups, OCWIC, attending any other of our events, attending Ohio X events, things like that. Oh, awesome. Yeah. People are sharing. Excellent. Thank you. And then I'm going to move on to the next question that I have in here, which is, do you have any tips on getting UX opportunities as someone in psych? It seems like a lot of internships and jobs nowadays only want people in computing, design, or business. Is it a grad program in UX the pathway? Is that the way to get in?
There's no one pathway. I'm sorry. Some people have had, there's a continuum. Okay. So some people have had success through going on a certificate program like Google and getting their UX cert. There are folks who have gone through programs in UX who are adamantly against those cert programs because they feel like it diminishes the education that you get in between. I tend to come from the camp of it doesn't matter. You'll get experience on the job. And the cert gives you a baseline that other people can mold you and work with you with. So if that's all that you can afford, go do that. Don't limit yourself because of haters or what other people might think of a program. And, not everybody's going to agree with my advice because there are a lot of bad actors in UX. So the concern is that you may not get the exact educational quality, and then you're putting that into the UX world. So that is sort of a byproduct of doing one route over the other. If you want to excel and be exposed to tools that you may not be exposed to, yeah, a grad program will work for you, and that'll be great. And it'll open up doors because you'll have advisors, you'll have, networking events, you'll have, teachers as mentors for you. But again, not everybody can afford that. I mean, graduate school is expensive, and then you have student loans and everything else. So kind of keep it open to what you can do and what you have the bandwidth and everything for. As far as being in psych, one of the things that limits folks in psych is, again, that academic rigor. I recently interviewed a graduate student in psych for a position at where I'm at. And she had excellent research skills. She had excellent quantitative abilities, but that was it. And again, it kind of goes back to that happy path. The only thing that came out of that interview that she knew was the happy path. And in industry, you almost never get that. Maybe you get one person that you can talk to, and that's it. And that's what you have to work with. And that has to be the best information that you have at that moment. It's not ideal, but the environment requires that. And so, again, there are multiple pathways to make it in. But just knowing that, again, it goes kind of back to those main buckets of ways of thinking. If you're going to be in psych and you really truly want to transition, you have to leave some of the traditional psych sort of ways of thinking and mentality at the door as you transition through, and do what you can to kind of bridge that.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for that. I have two more questions. One, you mentioned software development skills and tools like Storybook when speaking about industry responsibilities in UX design. Can you share your opinion about the current state of the industry job market and recent changes?
So it depends on your gender, obviously. So one of the industry stats that I just read was only about 29% of women are in the space, which is abysmal. And only 10% of that, and again, rough statistics here, but then only 10% of that are in executive positions. So it's really hard for women. And one of the things that I've also come across in my time is that women in those positions, some of them are reluctant to support other women. So as I mentioned, Melanie on the call, Julia, big supporter of women, obviously, that's wonderful. You may not encounter that in the actual real world because them supporting you means a threat to their position. So oftentimes, sometimes they're really awful to work with or for because they don't want you to exceed. And if you have a PhD, that's considered a threatening sort of positioning. And again, not always, not in every case, but you will run across individuals like that. And so what you get is a lot of women on women bullying, which is unfortunate because, and again, I kind of take the perspective of I'm going to empower women, I'm going to support women. So those are some industry trends. The other thing is, I mentioned gaming, huge turnover, lots of layoffs. Tech industry in general has been hit hard. This past like year and a half, 2 years, there's been a lot of holds on positions. I was even offered a position that was taken away the very next day that I was offered because they had a mass layoff. Luckily, I hadn't quit my job before. So that was a silver lining, but that type of stuff does happen. So again, it really does take a competitive mindset, but just because you have a competitive mindset doesn't mean that you have to put other people down. You can be competitive in your own lane and work alongside with others. And I think that that's how UX and tech will advance, is when we sort of propagate and try to adopt that mentality across rather than being at each other. So does that help a little bit? I'm trying to think what were the other parts of that question. So industry changes, yeah. So another industry change, again, that I'll speak to is I think a lot of people from psychology are trying to migrate over. And kind of getting back to that other question about are there other pathways? One of the ways that I forgot to mention that they're doing that is, again, kind of going back to those case studies I talked about. So initially, all I had was my dissertation to show to people and then that ticketing. But then at some point, I decided that I wanted to be a product designer. So I needed that experience. And I didn't have any proper product design experience because I had only ever been a UX researcher. So in order to get that product design M piece and to understand that part of the double or triple diamond, whatever it is you're wanting to reference, I went ahead and I started doing my own case studies. I'd get online, I'd use the free account in Figma, and I would start doing an analysis. And then I would put that on my portfolio as a case study. And then when I would interview, I would present that. And then that showcased that, oh, this person can do design as well. Wow. And she can do researcher, like activities. That sets her up for success. So again, just kind of, those are some trends too that I'm seeing, that, more and more folks from the behavioral sciences are kind of creeping in.
Awesome. We have about 5 minutes left. I have one more question in the chat so far, which is, since the job market is low for IT, how is the job market for UX design? If I want to train myself and get into this field, and it's interesting when listening to your ideas and format. And I know you talked a little bit about the job market already, but if there's anything you wanted to add.
So it's a little bit better for UX than it is for tech in general. But it's still, again, competitive. One of the things that I think is kind of niche that I know a lot of folks are kind of looking for is like UX developers or people who specialize in sort of developing from a user-centered approach. I've seen those are few and far between and valued, if you're kind of, moving over. Another thing is kind of like a trend that a lot of folks don't understand when they're moving over is never call it UI UX. That's awful. If you say UI UX, we automatically know that you don't know what you're talking about. UI is user interface. There are user interface components. UX is more about what's going on in here. How does it work best for the human? What's the process? So again, delineating those two, if you see a job posting for UI UX, know that it's probably a toxic environment or an environment where they don't know what they're doing. Uh, so again, one of the things that I didn't have a chance to highlight on here, but one of the things that you should familiarize yourself with if you are transitioning is the UX maturity model. Okay. So understanding that different organizations and corporations operate on that maturity model in various ways. Also note that a company might boast that they're higher on the maturity than they are to look attractive, but it's what we in the field call UX theater, which means it's just a facade. Sometimes you can't ascertain that until you get in that role and in that company, which is why I tend to see some turnover with UX professionals. Like maybe they'll work at a place for a year or 8 months, and then they'll leave a role. It's probably because of the environment and the maturity that they were working under. But again, you kind of need that experience, and you need to, unfortunately, be in that position to vet that out. Sometimes you can see warning flags in the interview phase, but most oftentimes not. But it adds to your experience. So look at everything as a data point for moving forward. And if one place doesn't work for you, that's just experience under your belt. That's experience in your portfolio. That's a data point. That's a moving forward point. And then go on to the next place.
Awesome. Thank you. I know we have about 2 minutes left, and I know that some folks are going to have to wrap up. So I'm just going to take one quick minute and say that thank you all for joining. We will get to the last question, Alaina, if you can hang on for another minute. But I want to officially say this is being recorded, and we will share that video with you. So if you do have to drop off at this point, right at 1 o'clock, we're going to continue to record through the last question, absolutely, and make sure that that gets answered for you. Also, this will be coming out sometime next week. And one other thing, I know a couple of folks mentioned mental health. And we are looking at having a session on that in late April in preparation for Mental Health Awareness Month, which is in May, and also a time when everyone's in finals. So we're planning that for April, and probably another session earlier in the year, early next year as well. So I'm going to go back. Thank you for that. And then we will go back to the last question that we have right now, which is any suggestions on doing free available projects for IT skills development and adding them on your resume? Will that add more weight to the resume?
So in terms of that question, it depends on your bandwidth. It depends on the lift of the project. Okay. So if it's this massive project that's just unreasonable, probably not worth it. If they're small iterative projects that can highlight skills that you have for the role you are applying for, then yes, do them. Because any experience towards again, that path that you're going to, point A to, end, any skills or activities that you can acquire that help you highlight that are going to be beneficial. So again, you have to kind of weigh pros and cons. It's kind of like cost benefit analysis to will that add value. But if it supports those activities that they're looking for that role, then yes, do it. If it's not a heavy lift for you personally. Okay. Yep. All right. Yep. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for listening to me. Hopefully some of it helped. And I appreciate all your kindness and your questions.
Awesome.
Yep.
Thank
and
you so
happy
much.
to connect too. And my LinkedIn will go out. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for your time today. This is amazing, Alaina. I really appreciate it. Thank you, everybody, for joining. And I will add Alaina's, as I said, LinkedIn, as well as the video link early next week. So you'll see that all soon. Thank you, everybody, from OCWIC, from Alaina, from everybody. Have a lovely rest of your day, a lovely weekend, and we hope to see you at our next event. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Bye.